Welcome back, or welcome to the Level 1 Coach Podcast. Drew and Mikael back with you today. This season has kind of been one giant singular conversation broken up into, I think this is the seventh part of it, but we were talking about at the end of the last one the mental model of shake or smoothie versus steak. I guess you could also do shake. It's similar to a smoothie, but smoothie versus steak in terms of information, how much we want to give as a coach, and the style in which we want to do so. So we're going to start with another quote from Brandon Naurato in that same article we talked about last time. And then I'm going to kick it over to my partner. So Brandon was asked in after the Frozen Four, the game that they lost to BC, he was asked whether he regrets not matching lines as a tool to slow Boston College's star power. And Naruto replied, I don't ever want to be concerned with that because it ruins the rhythm. I don't want to influence anything unless it's positive in a game. I want to influence everything leading up to games in practice, but when the weekends come, it's their team. I just want them to be able to play. I don't want to pull them away.
So for me, to start with just what he's literally talking about on the surface is matching lines. And what I really like about this, we on our staff, like we've talked about matching lines and should we, shouldn't we? And um I run the forwards in game and where I think I've always sort of landed with this, like pretty much 100% of the time. I can't think of a time where I didn't see it this way as like if we have four lines and obviously it depends on the game and how guys are playing. But say we go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's an ozone draw and we go 1, 2, and then sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, ozone draw back to one, and then 3, 4, and then whatever. You have your own like system, and there are times where maybe it's not one or two, but 3 or 4 have like a great shift and they come off, we get another line out, and I put them right back out. And the point is like, and this is like a ongoing conversation amongst honestly like all of us as coaches on the bench where like one of the whether our head coach or another assistant coach will say to me like they should get back out there, like that was a good shift, whatever. And we're usually all seeing the same things with that. But the point is like if we start matching lines, now other team, so in this scenario, BC is dictating how much Michigan's 1, 2, 3, 4 play. And if they want one matched up against X line and two matched up against Y line, if BC usually plays one of those lines 30 minutes a night, and Michigan doesn't do that. Now, Michigan, one of their lines is going to have to play 30 minutes that night. And there was a team this year that we played that had a similar, not similar, they're not BC, but they have a group of forwards they heavily rely on, and the guys are really good and they definitely play more. It's like 3 or 4 guys. So it's like a line and an extra that they play more than our forwards do on any given night. Like they're playing 25, 26 minutes a night, and our guys are playing 19, 20. And I remember thinking, like, well, if you look at the bottom of their line chart, like their fourth line is playing like 5 minutes, and our fourth line's playing usually 9 to 10. So is one way better than the other? No. Like what works for them works for them. What works for us works for us. But I don't want to get into the habit of now matching what they do because now we're taking ourselves out of minutes played and we're putting more minutes on certain guys and less on others. So that's like on the surface where I thought or where my mind went with that quote. And then the second part of it, like he's saying he wants to influence everything leading up to the game. And then once the game starts, like it's their team. Everyone's probably heard this that's in coaching, but like for practice, for coaches, I mean, practice is like their game. You've got to be prepared, make sure you're dialed in, making sure that everything that you want to get accomplished in that day is at least possible to accomplish. Whether it's accomplished perfectly or not, obviously, is not necessarily up to the coach, but um, like that's got to be your baby essentially on a daily basis. And then by the time it gets to game, like it's autopilot. And I think I think it's very true. I think it's really hard as a coach because like you want to make sure that you can impact the game if you need to. And as coaches, like taking a timeout at a certain time or putting a certain line out there at a certain time, like that can absolutely influence the game. But at the end of the day, like you as a coach aren't on the ice, your feet are going to be on the bench the entire 60 minutes. So they've got to go out and make plays as the players on your team. And it's your job from Monday to Thursday, Monday to Friday, whatever it is, to make sure they're prepared so that they can go out and just play. And I love that mindset of like I want to influence everything they do from like the time they get up to the time they get on the ice on that game day. So that 5 day increment, like I want to do everything I can to influence. But during the game, like just go play. I think that's ultimately like if you do a proper job, I don't want to say a good job, but if you do a proper job of preparing your team throughout the week, the game, it literally is kind of autopilot. You can hang out and yeah, you might have to insert yourself here and there, but for the most part, like you're hanging out while they're doing the work now.
Yeah, I will link my it reminds me of Jesse Marsh, just hired by the Canadian men's soccer team. Um, but he was on a podcast probably 2 or 3 years ago this time, but I listened to it maybe once a year just as a refresher because it's a nice perspective. But I'm very much in a line with what Naruto's saying, what you're saying, and Jesse Marsh has heavily influenced, or not heavily influenced because I was already doing it with a junior team, but he's kind of reaffirmed my belief in just game days are for the players. And the All Blacks talk about it too, like with their system and their setup. Like they kick it back even a day further, where they're handing it off not on game day, but game day -1. So like the day before the game, they do what's called a captain's run or captain's led practice, essentially. That's just the terminology they use. And if you're not familiar with that, just look up the All Blacks rugby team real quick. You'll find it. But I think it's when you understand, like, again, and we talk about first principles thinking a lot, but I think essentially what you're trying to do as a coach, hopefully, to use your term properly, maybe not good or bad, but I think if you want to give your players the best chance at performance success in a college hockey weekend or just on a game day, if you're at a different level, whether it's a Tuesday, whatever, I think the first principle is to get out of their way, or to use like one word, to unlimit them. And if you understand, like, I struggle to use the word science, but if you understand the concept and the principles of like flow state, um, you have to put them in an environment and create an environment that Nerato's talking about, where they have autonomy and there's love in the environment and they're not being condemned for mistakes and they're not being overanalyzed between shifts and they're free. So my brain initially goes there with that, and I'll kick it to you if you have thoughts, and then we can keep rolling.
So yeah, I think two things came to mind for me when you're talking about like like game day is for them and hand it off to the players. The one thing I think a coach that I worked with, and you mentioned him last podcast, so we can throw out another shout out. But when I worked with TJ Manastersky, he had this thing that I'd literally never heard of, and I don't remember the exact term, but it was essentially like what he was getting at was on the day of a game, the only thing that matters for the coach is their mind. And really the only thing within your mind that matters is your decision-making ability, because you're going to be potentially called upon to make like two or three pretty tough decisions. And it could be when to use a timeout, like I said. It could be to pull or not pull your goalie, meaning in the game or also at the end of the game. It could be this line versus that line. A penalty's taken. Is that bench worthy or not? Is it whatever? Like, and then after the game, like when you're going through lineup decisions, maybe evaluating, just that night for the next game. Like that's, I guess, more of a next day problem. But in general, like you're going to be probably called upon to make a couple tough decisions throughout the course of that day. And so I don't remember the term he had for it. So I wish I could, but I can't recall it right now. But I think of it like a decision bank. Like if you if you make a bunch of decisions leading up to the day or leading up to the game that night, you've like drained that bank. And now your decision bank is kind of low. If you can automate a bunch of decisions leading up to the game, then like your decision bank is full. And so he would talked about how like game on Friday, he's gonna pick out his suit Thursday night. Don't decide what suit, what tie, what shoes, what belt. Do all of that the night before. Don't even think about a day game. It's already automated. Breakfast, I already know I'm having two eggs and a piece of bacon and toast. And lunch, I know I'm having a sandwich, whatever. Like you don't have to think about that. What time you get into the game, it's just you get in there at 4:30 because you always get there at 4:30. What time you waking up? You're waking up at 8 because you always wake up at 8. And it was just like, can I just automate as many decisions as possible so that I don't waste a bunch of like decision energy from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. before I've even gotten to the rink, and now I have to make some tough decisions. So I I, I think of like game day for coaches, that's what it should be about. And I try to take some of those things myself, and like I'm always like bugging Lindsay the night before a game, like what suit should I wear tomorrow? Like give me give me your thoughts so that I can just pick this out tonight and don't have to worry about it. I don't trust my own style usually. So that's one thing. And the other thing I'm thinking of with where you say unlimit, something that I recently learned about, and maybe you've known about this, I don't think we've talked about it, is reversed effort. And the concept I was reading about was like sprinters intentionally will try to race at 85% instead of 100% because when they're racing at 85, they're looser, they're mentally more relaxed, and their muscles quite literally work better. When they're running at perceived 100%, they're tight, they're very like nervous, and their muscles actually don't contract and expand and all that scientific shit. And they don't work as well. So when runners get into their actual race day, like they are taught, at least what I was reading, and I don't remember exactly like what country or coach did this, but they are taught to go at like 85%. Don't go 100%. And those times that they put out at 85%, quote 85% effort, are better than their 100% times. And so what I think of with this is very similar. It's like what you want to unlimit the players in your words, and that's in a way reversed effort. Like I want you to go out there and play free. I don't want to tell you that today is the championship game, and if we lose, our season's over. And if you make a mistake, it quite honestly could end up in the back of our net, and we might lose this game 1-0 because of your mistake. You want to go out there and be like, hey, just another game. We did this yesterday or last weekend. We've been a great team all year. We've won X amount of games. This is just another opponent. Don't worry about it. We're gonna go out there, have fun, enjoy it, come home with a championship. And like that, what you're getting at, one is like, let's just pour a ton of pressure on this moment that's already full of pressure. And the other one is like, let's just make this day seem like any other day because I don't have to speak it into existence that it's not any other day. We all know it's not. But if I can just try to create as normal conditions as possible, our effort could be better because we're not so nervous about making one mistake that blows our whole season. So I think like it's a little different, but the framing is very similar. Like the sprint coaches want their players to enter that or want their sprinters to enter that race, you know, putting out like a lesser effort so that their body can actually be better and sprint faster. And as a coach in a sport in a team sport like hockey, whatever, football. Like I think you want your team to go out there and play loose and relaxed and calm because you've all seen players that get uptight and nervous prior to a big game. Like you don't play well. So that's where my mind went with just building off of where you were going.
Yeah, I haven't heard of like the term reversed effort, but I thought you were gonna say that golf coach book you were reading because it applies to like I learned it just learning how to play golf, like whether it was my dad or I think I got lessons like once when I was really bad and swinging at 100% versus swinging at 85%. Um, you if you've golfed and you're probably familiar with the concept, so like I don't need to beat that to death, but you learn it pretty quick just through experiencing hitting a bucket. What like 100% and like gripping it versus like loosening up and letting go. So that's like there's a physical side to it, and that's like the reverse effort thing you're talking to. And then where my brain goes, not shocking, is power versus force, but there's a mental side to it too. So I'll give you a little context and then I'll tell you a personal example that I've been experimenting with lifting weights. But when you're in a fearful below 200 mental state, whether you get that programming or that energy from a coach in a pregame speech, or whether you create that in your own head after a bad shift and you start catastrophizing and saying negative, destructive things to yourself, you actually physically, it ties in with the physical too. The mental creates the physical. So, like, mental weakness creates physical weakness. And there are, for example, I think he studied sprinters and distance runners, Hawkins. And if you run a race with something above 200 in mind, so for example, if I ran a 100-meter race and I held my fiance, Tiffany, in mind, who we have a very non-toxic, very healthy, very loving relationship. So for some of you, that might not work. But for me, if I held her in mind and you measured my force production off of the block, I would have a better first push, a stronger first push, and I would run the race faster if I held her in mind for, let's say it was a 100-meter race. Then if I get in the starting blocks and contrasting example, my college coach, who I didn't like at all, um, if I held him in mind, he would make me go physically weak because his energy that he gave towards me my whole career was below 200. It was fearful. Um, so if you measured the force production of my first push, if I'm holding him in mind, it's not going to be as strong as if I'm thinking about Tiffany. And my 100-meter total race is going to take longer because with each stride, also physical weakness because I'm holding him in mind. So mental weakness creates physical weakness. So if you don't think like your energy and like who you're being as a coach and your messaging before a game, your messaging on the bench, that's why I try and do less because if I do nothing or if I'm trying to just if I notice something with a player and they're in their own head and they're in their own way, I'll try to like intervene and come at it with love and like unblock that really quick. But they're already probably giving themselves enough shit and not enough grace and not enough slack. Where if I'm just adding to that, I'm compounding their issue. I threw a lot at you, so I'll kick that back to you.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, I'll start with building off of your golf example because I think it's golf is a great sport to test exactly that with. Like you're talking about running with two different people in mind and what that does. Uh, Hitting a golf shot over a body of water, if you're sitting there going, "Oh boy, I'm gonna smoke this right into that pond," like you probably will. And if you go up and just don't think about anything, which is harder to do obviously than uh than said. But or if you just go up and you're like, I'm just gonna hit this because like whatever, it's just golf. It's not a big deal. Like probably have a decent shot. And that is a very elementary, simplified version that I just gave. But that book that you referenced, How Champions Think by Bob Rotella, he gets into a lot of that of like what specifically he works with a lot of golfers, like what golfers tell themselves before they hit a shot is massively important to how that shot plays out. Their physical attributes did not change from the previous shot to this shot to the next shot. It's what they tell themselves. And he actually gives an interesting example of a lot of golfers will have like two or three things they'll just say to themselves before they hit the ball so that they're not thinking about that body of water or that sand trap or crushing it into the stands. So like I don't remember what it is, but it literally might just be like 1, 2, 3, I'm the best. 1, 2, 3, I'm the best. And that's all they say to themselves so that they're not ever thinking about the extraneous things. Um, so I think I've never tried what you're talking about, but I think it makes sense for sure. And then the second part of like the players, like I think this is true if you take almost any team at, call it higher levels. So like U16 and above, where kids are more mature now and are maybe more self-aware and understand like what a good play versus a not so good play is and the differences. So you got to have a certain like you couldn't do this with like a U12 AAA team, even if the kids are really good, because they may just not know yet. They're still very young. But once you get to a certain level, like I'm talking juniors, college, prep school, pro, of course, like guys know when they make a mistake. Like they're aware. And there are certainly times where you might have a player, he doesn't make a mistake, but he passes up a good play for what he thought was a better play that doesn't work out. That's like a good teaching moment where you can be like, hey, like you went for let's say you dish this one off in the slot thinking that backdoor was a better play. You were already in the slot. Like you just could shoot that. He's not like that is a good, maybe a better opportunity to get involved. But if a guy like is is a winger on the wall, makes a backhand pass through the middle to no one, turnover right up the gut, and they get a shot off, like he knows. So like
Yeah.
you can yell at him and you can jump down his throat and not even you don't even have to yell or jump down his throat. You can get down and be like, hey man, like we gotta have a better play. But at the end of the day, like if that guy's playing at the levels we're talking about for the most part, like he knows he is well aware that that play wasn't ideal. And I found just like this is obviously at the Division 3 level, so I'm sure it's true at the Division 1 level, but I found with our players like 95% of them know the minute the play occurs that that wasn't the best play available. And before, like sometimes I will literally step off the bench to just say like, "Hey, don't worry about it. Like that's all right. Like all good." Essentially. And before I've even said anything, guys are like ready to like, I know, I know, I know. And I'm like, no, I'm not mad. Like it's
Hmm.
like I know that you know. I don't need to now have a conversation with you. I'm just saying like it's one play. It's the second period, early in the game. It's tied 0-0. Don't worry about it. Just flush it, come back ready to go next shift. And so the point for me is just like there is it's a natural tendency as a coach to want to make sure you tell the player like that wasn't great. You could do better, but the best players and I don't even know if it's truly limited to just the best players. I think the majority of players honestly know when they make good plays versus when they make not great plays, and they don't even necessarily need to be told. It's just obvious. Like they turn the puck over, they know. So,
Yeah. I used to like give the extreme example of like kids know as early as I don't remember when I started riding a bike. Let's call it 5 or 6. Maybe that's too early. I don't know. Someone can correct me on when kids start learning to ride a bike, but it's like when you fall off. Like it's a lot of turnover or not, um, miss pass or pass on the tape. Like a lot of the results, and maybe a lot is the wrong word. Results are binary pretty much. Um, in terms of like completed pass, not completed pass, fell off your bike, didn't fall off your bike, turn the puck over, didn't turn the puck over. So like I think kids know even younger than that. Um, but the thing that I did want to hit on from what you said was like the idea of early on, um, in your take, the phrase that came to mind, I think it's dispensa, but like what you think about, you bring about. And it's it's true for coaches and it's true for players, and we've kind of been going back and forth on both this podcast. But like for coaches, if you're looking for it, you'll find it. If you're looking for the turnovers that we were just talking about, and if you're looking for reasons to jump down a kid's throat or coach in air quotes, where I think when maybe we can transition into this, but like we've talked about it in hiring in the last couple episodes, and it's just this need to, and I think it's programming, but it's this need to do something because it looks better than doing nothing. And if a kid turns the puck over, it's like all of these all of these parents that our junior team wasn't successful in terms of wins losses, and Tiffany was at some of the games. She lived out of town finishing a master's degree, but sometimes she'd come and visit and she'd just sit in the top and listen. And it goes back to this Jesse Marsh article. It goes back to what we were first talking about. But the parents would be like, they would see like a really bad play, um, and they're just fully expecting, because it's what they've experienced in the past, for the coach, which was me in this case, to just like come unglued, start screaming as they're coming off the ice and put on the show. And it's signaling is a Rory Sutherland term from the book Alchemy. If you haven't read it, highly recommend. But we, like, parents almost want the show, and some of the other stakeholders, I even think, want the show more than they want what actually matters. And we've talked about this with hiring, with Buffalo and Toronto firing, actually. But I think so much of what, there's this illusion between like what is optics and what is like actually valuable. And we'd almost rather have the optics because they like look cool, or we can talk about them, or like it looks better when Drew screams at a kid for turning a puck over than just like grab him by the arm or grab him by the shoulder, I mean, and say, hey man, I know you fucked up. You know you fucked up. Try and play better, and like make it a joke, or like try and bring some light or some humor, or like to free the kid up, to not make him go physically weak, to alchemize his negative energy into positive energy. Like that doesn't look as good as just like screaming at him. Um, I'm kind of off on a tangent. If you want to course correct, or if you want to let that ride and just roll with it.
Well, my question to you would be, how many parents watched your practices?
Zero.
How many parents attended any film sessions you did?
Zero.
Well, there you go. So from the parent's perspective, the only time you're teaching is when they're there, which is during the game on the bench. And so if they don't see you do something mid-game, they're like, what's this guy's value?
Mhm.
But no one's coming to a Monday practice where you skate for an hour and had 30 minutes of film beforehand, or even if it was you skated for 30 minutes and had 15 minutes of film, whatever. No one's coming to that. So that goes to the perception that you talked about of what we, and where does this all stem from? Honestly, it stems from the TV and pro sports.
Yep.
And you watch an NHL game, or I mean, this happens in the playoffs all the time. I think we were talking about this off air actually. Like, hey, New York, Carolina, timeout. New York's up a goal. Carolina's going to come back to keep their season alive. Announcers, Rod Brendamore down there drawing up a play. Like, no, he's not. I mean, maybe he is. Maybe he is. I don't know. I personally am like, I'm pretty sure the six guys that are going to be on the ice for Carolina know the multitude of faceoff plays that the team has that they may run. And Brendan Moore may be talking about which one to run, or like what to do if X happens. But like to think that he's down there like masterminding in the moment is just like not how coaching works. And so, but that's where you see that on TV, you hear announcers talk about it. So now when Cindy and Jim come to watch their kid play for Drew, and Drew's not drawing up a face-off play mid-game, or he's not using the board to tell someone how to do something right after it occurred, it's like, well, Drew's not teaching. Well, no, Drew is putting in the time Monday to Thursday, Monday to Friday, whatever it is, before the game, so that in the game we can just play and then we can teach after. And it's something that like it is it is hard to do at times because you as a coach you want to think that you can immediately impact. But like you got to ask yourself like when you were a player, like I'll speak for myself as a player. Like I never like literally never heard anything that my coach said to me while I was on the ice. Meaning like when he if he yelled, and this is at any level ever, if I usually didn't even know that our coaches yelled during games until our goalie would tell us. Like I lived with our goalie in college for 4 years and I played juniors with him too. And if he would say like, "Did you hear whatever?" I'd be like, "No." He would hear it because he's either backing up or in the net. And if he's in the net and the plays at the ozone, like he's just kind of chilling. But like as a player, when you're on the ice, like you don't ever hear that shit. And so the point is like you're in such a different frame of mind that even when you get back to the bench, like yes, you are able to hear things, but again, now you're like focusing on the next shift, or you're maybe beating yourself up over whatever just happened in the previous shift. So you're not like your mind is really not that receptive to teaching and learning at that point. Whereas if I bring you to the office like now as a coach, if I bring you to my office on like a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday or whatever day, like you are definitely not in your game frame mindset right now. You had class, you had a lift, maybe you have nothing that day. It doesn't matter. The point is like you're not amped up on adrenaline and six Red Bulls and whatever. So you can actually process whatever it is that we need to talk about or that I want to talk about. And I think as a coach, like you have to you have to be like self-aware and also very intentional in the moment to be like, this is not the best time to teach this. And there are certainly times where I would disagree with myself and I would say like if it's in between the second and third period and you know you're starting the third period up on the power play and you've like you need to fix this thing that has not gone well the previous two iterations you've had, like by all means, get the players in the coach's room and talk about it. I'm not saying that like you just do literally nothing all the time, but like ask yourself, like, is this going to help in the moment or is this a Monday thing? And I think like a lot of things that are said in games could be Monday things, and then you would be left with very few that you would actually want to go forward and talk about. And this is where I come to with this. And you've said this before. If everything's important, nothing's important. So if there's a comment for everything, then nothing matters. Or if there's like a system for everything, then nothing's important because you don't know what the most important systems are. So if you as a coach, like for you as a head coach in juniors, if you are going to say 70 things through the course of a game, how do the players know the five that were really important? Like it's honestly, they don't. And you may not even know in the moment. But as a coach, if you normally say 70 things and you can be like, you know what, like I know that realistically, there's only like 10 things that are that important. And of those 10, only five are like super urgent. I'm going to hold my breath until I have one of those five things to say. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it, but to me, like I would rather say less and when I'm speaking, know that it's important because I'm not just coming at you with everything and anything, than come at you with everything and anything and then try to stress the importance of this one because the last one was sort of important, but this one's more important. I think it's confusing and I think it's hard to know what truly matters if you're always picking things out. If you can just hey, let's get to the bottom of these five things. These are so important. I'm going to hammer these. Now your players know, like, shit, Drew's talking right now, mid game, it must matter.
Yeah. The the thing that I want to repeat before I start because I think it's a really good one and it hits at my point and it hits at the principle. But asking yourself before you intervene, is this a Monday thing? That's fucking huge. Um, and the principle that it reminds me of, and I did a really bad job and brought a Tom and Jerry grandfather clock in to the example. So I'll try and do a little bit better this time. But it reminds me of critical point, and the principle behind that. And essentially all that it is, without getting into Saturday cartoon examples, is what is the least amount of effort for the most amount of change that I can have. So if you talk about like the 70 things that, I mean, I've had coaches that it's information overload on game day and you don't remember any of it. Just like if you skim through a book really quick, if you have to read like a chapter 10 minutes before English class, that you didn't read, like you can skim it, but like you're not going to be able to contribute to discussion confidently and bring things actually of value to the table. So the critical point is, instead of the 70 things, it's what 2 things can I say during this game at the most impactful moments that are really going to matter. If I just sit on my hands, and it's going to look like I'm not coaching, but to your point, like if Drew's opening his mouth other than like good shift, nice job, things like that. But like if Drew's really trying to impart wisdom, and I'm using myself in the third person, so I hate myself, but if I'm if I'm speaking for the first time trying to impart actual wisdom in the second intermission, I think you're going to get more ears than if I've just been yelling skate and dump it or get it deep or play north, the whole game on the bench. And we all know those people. And if you're listening, I'm not sorry, but I'll kick it over to
Well,
you.
well, this applies, I think, like if you're thinking about this as a listener and you're like, I don't know, like, is that really true? Like, think of any sports team you've played on if you've played a team sport. And think of that guy or girl in the locker room that constantly had something to say. And it was just like, you know, from what do we need to do better mid-game to what are we doing tonight after the game to post-practice, what's the dinner plan? Like I played with plenty of kids that were like that, just like always had something to say about everything. And you like them, but like I don't, at some point, I don't want to hear it. And I don't even really process what you're saying because I just hear it all the time. And what happens is, at least for me, those kids, when you get into a game and they have something to say about like the power play or the PK or the opponent, I'm just like, dude, shut up. Like you always have something to say. So I don't really trust that like now I should listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a very similar principle of like if you are always talking as a player, as a teammate, your teammates eventually tune you out. And to think, I mean, a player is a human and a coach is a human. So if 2 humans are doing the same thing, regardless of title, probably no player is going to tell you, Coach, I tune you out because there's a power dynamic there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's still happening.
Yep.
And so that yeah, that's one thing. And then I think back to like what you brought up a little bit earlier is like what you think about, you bring about. And this is 100% true as a coach. Like if you if you think about if you think about how things could go wrong, you will you will put that out, like that energy out to your players. And I don't know that it's so much you'll speak it. Like I'm not sure that you would go out there and you would say like if we turn pucks over, we're gonna lose tonight. You might. But I think in the game, if that's what you're thinking about, you bring about that like aura. And the example I'll give is there's a coach that I've heard, not college level, just in general, different level. I've heard say plenty of times like the refs. the opponents. There's always something outside going on that is causing his team to not have the success that they should. And you listen to it and like I'm not gonna get involved in a he said, she said over that. So it's like, oh yeah, that's tough, whatever. Watching a game earlier, this was 2 years ago, 2 years ago, watching a game of his team play and knowing that that's the context, right? Of like refs and opponents. And team is losing close game, like 2 or 3 to 1 in the third period. And player gives up on his team a breakaway and like the arms go up and he paces up and down the bench throwing his hand up and then ref makes a call it a bad call or just a call against him and maybe it was bad honestly. Same thing, hands go up, arms go up, pissed off, like now the game goes 4, 5, 6, 1 out of hand and you lose. And what I thought about afterwards was like, I know that he says refs, opponents, blah, blah, blah are reasons why we haven't had as good of a year as we could. And then I watched in the game those things come to fruition. The refs did impact his team because they made calls, coach freaked out, players lost their shit. And then the opponent thing of like, you turn a puck over, they get a breakaway. They didn't score, but you're still arms everywhere on the bench and screaming. And it's like in your like honestly, in his mind, he's right. It is the refs and the opponents that cause them to lose because that's he thinks that, and then he gets in a game and he enables it all to happen. And um it it's why what you think about matters and what to your quote, what you think about is what you bring about is 100% true. Because if you go in there with an exact opposite mindset and it's like this is all about us. All that matters is how we play and what we do. I don't want to worry about the refs. I don't want to worry about the opponent. I don't want to worry about the ice sheet. I don't want to worry about the fans down to every last thing. All I care about is the 20 guys in this room and the 5 coaches on the bench, and that's it. That's all we're going to talk about. I don't know if you're going to win. I don't. I'm not saying you're going to win, but I know one thing is true is that no matter what happens in that game, the only thing you're thinking about is the 25 of you that wear the same jersey, work for the same team. So it's like more people need to understand that, I guess. What you think about is what you bring about. That's where I come to.
Yeah, I've got another example. You can guess where it comes from. But before I get to that, um, yeah, I'm gonna get to that first actually, and then I'll wrap it up with my thoughts. But so you talk about, and you might be listening and be like, all right, Mikkel mentioned aura, like checked out, but real thing, power versus force. Hawkins studied all this stuff, so if you think it's frou-frou and voodoo magic or whatever, it's all real. You can read the book. But um, he talks about you talked about energy, and players are affected by leadership's energy. So if you're sitting there nervous on the bench and catastrophizing or being a victim to the refs or the ice or whatever, you're putting out that energy, and you don't even have to put it out verbally for the players to be affected by that. And he gives an example of Alcoholics Anonymous, the group. And what happens is typically addicts they calibrate below 200. So they calibrate in this victim, this negative, destructive energy. So whether there's shame or guilt or anger around their condition, they live in that reality. So what AA does and these meetings do is they create an environment where the leaders and the sponsors and the other people there calibrate at 540 energy, which is unconditional love. And that's the energy where healing begins to happen. So what happens is while these people, let's say there's an addict at the meeting that calibrates at 50, super low, super destructive, apathetic, guilty, has all these negative feelings. When they come sit in this room, their calibration, their energy is positively affected. Now, they might not get all the way up to 540, but if they were at 50, they've moved up. So they've come into more positive energy. They're more capable, more willing to make changes, be supported, be supportive of others, whatever. So if you can, they say they have like a slogan, just bring them to the meeting, and through osmosis, like they'll improve just being around that energy. So if you're a coach and you're putting out negative, victim, yelling at the refs, thinking negative, destructive thoughts about players that turn the puck over, you're probably saying something, because coaching is very verbal and force coaching is also very verbal. But even if you're not saying anything and you're thinking it and you're feeling it and it's just there and you're experiencing it internally, all the players in front of you on the bench are feeding off your energy. So just as AA or a coach in power can positively bring up your players' calibration and their energy and bring positive thoughts to them and help them and love and nurture the environment, you can also go the other way. So you can have an anti-AA meeting, which is a coach that is bringing the energy of players actually down instead of up. So that's why by almost doing nothing, do no harm is another, like, you hear it in the medical field and stuff like that. But we kind of talked about at the beginning, like getting out of their way involves like from first principles, like saying nothing sometimes is better than saying something. I'll kick that over to you.
Yeah, I think it matters like what you're saying as far as like your energy. It matters because they're subconscious things that you don't even recognize you're doing, and no one could recognize they're doing them. And look, I haven't even read Power versus Force. I'm still at like page 100 something, that I like 110 that I've been at for like months now. So like this, I don't even necessarily know the science behind it or have read as deeply as you have, but you arms crossed versus hands at your side, lips pursed versus smiling. Like those are all little subconscious things that people do, that if you're nervous or angry or just uptight versus relaxed, calm, like happy, you're giving off a very different look, where a player comes back to the bench and they can see like coach's arms are crossed, he's got his eyebrows furled and his lips pursed. Like they may not be able to articulate why they think you're upset, but they're gonna know or feel, hey, he's upset. Versus like you're calmer and you don't have that like same sort of look on your face. Your arms are at your side. Maybe you're, like you said, you're adding some levity to the situation with a different player or whatever. Like that, that is a different feeling when you come back to the bench and see a coach like that. And so it does impact, um, how players play and how they perceive the game to be going, and whether they think they can come back or not. And um, yeah, it's interesting because I'm trying to think back to this year and like the games that maybe I definitely had like an uptight, like just nervous energy. Like there was a game at home where we got shut out, and it was a team that like standings wise we were better than at that point, or higher than in the standings, and it just felt like everything was going wrong for us, like from the start. Just like we had offensive chances and they weren't going in, and this team is known to be tough defensively to score on. And I feel like all game I was just kind of pissed, like, yep, here we go again. Like this is how it's gonna go. And then I think back to like our playoff game, and I'm not saying this is why we came back or win versus why we lose, but I remember in our playoff game, like we were down 2-0, and it's like there's not many worse scenarios to be in than hosting a playoff game down 2-0 early. Like that's a not great spot. And I remember thinking in that moment, like it's playoffs. Like we kind of are what we are. Like I don't know what I'm gonna do in this moment to make us better. And almost just being like, yeah, like whatever. That we're down and we gotta find a way out, or we don't and we lose and our season's over. And like almost like aloof, just like, yeah, I don't know what to say right now. And we did end up coming back, and I'm not saying that that's why we came back, but more so like I think if you're a player and you see your coach like, yeah, yeah, he's like he's not worried about it, then I'm not going to be worried yet. Versus if it's the first period in that other game I'm talking about, we haven't scored and coach is already pissed, maybe I'm going to start getting nervous because he's already mad and it's only the first period, or he's already nervous and it's only the first. So I think like, this is also all of this is not to say that this is the only way to do it and you have to be like this all the time. Like I do think feedback I've gotten, I mentioned it earlier in this podcast season, like about being like more direct and a little bit better at just being firm with things that I say as a coach and not always having like an engaging conversational style of things. So like I'm not saying that there is a time and a place for all of what we're talking about. Um, but just as there is a time and a place to be upset and angry as well. Like you can't have one or the other just be your permanent default where you never venture from that. Like if you as a coach only had this like laid back, like calm approach and you took that all the way to practice and film, like you probably wouldn't be finding things for the team to do better because you'd always just be kind of like laissez-faire, like, yeah, it's all good, man. Like, don't worry. So like as a coach, in those moments, like you do have to find times to be maybe stricter or like more intentional with how you direct your energy in terms of like getting better and being like clear with what the standard or accountability, all that kind of stuff. Like, so it's not to say that this is like you just need to go operate like this 100% of the time and like all things are going to be good. Um, but I think sometimes like the biggest thing I guess I come to is like the misconception that if you're acting like that, like you said earlier, like Drew's not really doing anything. So like if you see a coach doing that in the game, it's like, does he even care? He doesn't even want to win. Like um what you see in a game is I mean literally probably 1/10 of what goes on throughout the course of a week of practice video. Um so yeah, I guess like it's not to say this is the only way to work, but I also wouldn't say that you should judge everything that you see just based off of those small interactions.
Yeah, the difference between a practice day and a game day. And I think if anyone's misconstrued it, we've talked pretty much specifically starting with the quote at the beginning, um, in terms of game day. And I think what you said is 100% valid. And there are differences, but just wrapping it up, like on game day, your job is let the players perform. And the best way that they can do that is if they feel cared for, unlimited, loved. It's a tough word for some people. Um, but if there is positive, constructive energy in the environment and they're allowed to be unlimited, um, that often doesn't look like what we think coaching looks like. And it might not look like that in practice. And you might be more involved in teaching and being more direct or however you do it. Everyone's got a style, everyone's got preferences, but the principles are the principles. And on game day, the principle is get out of their way. And if they're in their own way, help them get out of their own way, by making positive, constructive interactions with the player. I'll kick it to you if you have anything to wrap up.
Yeah, that was a good way to bring back what I was saying because I was getting a little squirrely, I think, with what I was trying to get at. But yeah, that it's on game day. This is what the essential role of the coach is. It's not to say that's what you do all the time everywhere. And I think the last thing I'd add is like this is also, in my opinion, very true of hockey, which is fast, chaotic, unpredictable. If you're looking at football and I don't even know if I should list off other sports because I don't coach them, so I don't know what other sports are like more or less coach involved. But
Mhm.
I think, at least from my perspective, it appears that sports like football or baseball have a lot more opportunity for the coach to get involved because they're slower and there's a lot more strategy going on, and it's a static, and then it's like quick movements and then we're static, and then quick movements and we're like, so there's opportunities for the coach to, like, the defense is off the field for football, now you can talk to them about what to do the next time you're out there. And baseball, it's like your pitcher just walked four guys and then he got three outs, and so now he's, your team's hitting, and now you can talk to him about, like, okay, why'd you walk those four guys? Like, there's very few opportunities for that in hockey. I know you come back to the bench, but the game itself is so chaotic most of the time and unpredictable that it's very hard to be like, okay, next time that receiver runs this route, I want you to do this. Next time the batter lines up like this, I want you to do that. Like, in hockey, like, man, like, the special teams might be one of the only times in faceoffs that you can really pinpoint, like, if you see the defender stick like this, do that. Or if you see the center doing this with his bottom hand, do this. Like, there's not as many opportunities to insert yourself. So that's where, like, game day becomes autopilot and practice becomes where you are in between innings talking to your pitcher, or practices in between offense and defense for football where you can talk. At that time to do that with a sport like hockey, to me, is practice.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to wrap up. If you got some value out of this one, share the show. Uh, Throw us a bone, help us out a little bit. No, I'm just kidding. But if you actually got value, and you feel like sharing this with a buddy, a coaching friend, or just if there's parenting value in this, I've heard some people say, not necessarily this podcast, but maybe this podcast, but like sometimes you'll hear in the writing that you and I have done. If you've gotten some feedback, I haven't gotten a ton, but people have said it's made them a better parent. So even if it doesn't make you a better coach, if it makes you a better person, and we talked about some power versus force stuff, it will make you a better person. You can read about that in the book too. But I'm going to shut up and sign off, and we'll see you on the next one.